Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you for your kind introduction, for your welcome. Michael, thank you for that wonderful poem just to start off the Edinburgh International Festival. And thank you to the Edinburgh International Festival for hosting us here at the Hub, a magnificent architectural asset in our capital city, but also a gathering place for creativity and for joy. I have fond memories of being here last year to see a fantastic performance of the Brazilian musicians of Illumina. That was a performance of fun, curious sounds, and the deepest enjoyment of cultural experience. So it's a lovely pleasure to be back here once again. We're once again approaching that point in the year where, for a few weeks, this city becomes the undisputed centre of the cultural universe. It's often the disputed centre of the cultural universe, but for this period, the undisputed centre. So this feels like an apt time for us to come together, and for me as First Minister to set out to you not only the immense value that I place on Scotland's cultural activity, but also how I intend to help you grow and build on what are already outstanding successes and foundations. Since I became First Minister, I've made it my business to bring people together. I've also set out some very clear priorities for my government around eradicating child poverty, improving public services, growing the economy, and tackling the climate emergency. And over the last few months, I've held some very exciting discussions on my 4 priorities with key stakeholders from across Civic Scotland. We've discussed how we can all work together to build a better nation, and today I have this further welcome opportunity to take forward this discussion with you all. Because I firmly believe that the people gathered in this room are essential to building that better nation. So this is your opportunity to hear directly from me, but more importantly, your chance to speak directly to me, to ask me your questions, to voice your concerns, and to share your thoughts and ideas, and importantly, your challenge. I want to know what I and my government can do more to assist in the development of Scotland's cultural strength. I want to support you in every way that I can because I know just how much you enrich our country. As someone who was born and brought up only a couple of miles from here, Edinburgh's festivals have been a big part of my life, though it might not always have felt like that to me. That was, of course, until my beloved late mother intervened. As a rather disinterested teenager, listening more to the Jam than Sibelius, my mother took me along one night to a performance just next door in the General Assembly Hall of Sir David Lindsay's A Satire of the Three Estates. I can remember coming into town on the number 1 bus thinking, what am I going to? What on earth is this going to be like? What is my mother up to taking me to this event? I went home on the number 1 bus that night, knowing that my mother had just given me yet another great gift in my life. I was captivated by the discourse, humour, the consideration of major themes and relationships in our society, the beauty and the majesty of the performance. I learned that deep cultural experience is good and it's essential for the soul. And that's part of who I am. Of course, the festivals are only one of many jewels in Scotland's cultural crown. We have an outstanding arts and cultural scene all year round in our cities and throughout our country. For nearly 3 decades, I've had the privilege to be the parliamentarian who represents Pitlochry Festival Theatre. And what a joy that is. My family and I are regular visitors, and as the constituency representative, I cannot put into words how much the venue is treasured by people in the local community, let alone across Perthshire and further afield. I suppose I draw an important conclusion from those 2 very different examples, the Edinburgh Festivals and Pitlochry Festival Theatre, because they encapsulate what I desire for Scotland's cultural scene in the years and the decades ahead. I want Scotland to continue playing a leading role on the world stage with some of the most prestigious events that we can possibly host. I want our many diverse creative industries to grow and to flourish. But I also want every community across our nation to have access to all of the benefits of a booming local cultural scene on their doorstep. I want the biggest organisations to thrive, but I also want the very smallest outfits to thrive too. Now, when I look around about me, I see a room full of individuals not only dedicated to their craft, but also passionate about making Scotland a better country, and all critical to achieving that aim. From a government perspective, culture is quite a unique sector. Yes, like other sectors, it is absolutely essential to our economic prosperity. Our creative industries contribute over £5 billion to our economy annually, and they support over 70,000 jobs through 15,000 businesses. But there's much more that you do to enrich our nation that can't be measured in pounds or pence. Those wider benefits ripple throughout our society. Culture gets to the very heart of our shared history and our national identity. It shapes our public spaces and our environments. It contributes to education, to social dialogue, and to social justice. Galleries and museums tell our story. Music and dance brings us together. Poetry and literature move us and inspire us to take action. Ceilidhs and concerts uplift us and invite others to join in with us. And of course, culture can influence our political process. I've been involved in politics long enough to know that in the very dark years of the 1980s, long before the political process found the impetus to establish the Scottish Parliament, artists, poets, musicians and playwrights were providing the hope and the aspiration for self-government that was absent from politics. In the 2014 independence referendum, the artwork, the stories, the poems, the songs, the plays, the short films and much more weighed up some of the most fundamental issues facing our country. Just yesterday, I visited the Fragile Planet exhibition at the University of Stirling, curated by the Fleming Collection, which considers the profound issues around climate change and challenges the observer through appreciation of dramatic artwork on what action has to be taken to address the implications for our society of this deepest of threats. Culture is both what we inherit and what we create together to pass on to future generations and to the world. On a daily basis, it provides us with our energy and our essence, our personality, our presence. I think of the countless arts and health programmes across Scotland that every day are helping people recover from trauma, loneliness and isolation. I think of Systema Scotland's Big Noise programme in Raploch. When I visited that wonderful project last summer and spoke to young people, to parents and to teachers, it was clear that music had transformed confidence, teamwork and joy for children who might otherwise have felt left behind. Those are life-changing skills and experiences. And when I look at the huge success stories of our public agencies in recent years, I'm in every bit as interested in the wider benefits as I am in the economic ones. Our screen industry, for example, is growing at a scale that simply wasn't possible before the establishment of Screen Scotland. We've seen huge economic growth with a goal to reach £1 billion of value to the Scottish economy by 2030. And just look at what that growth is actually leading to today. An explosion in the number of homegrown productions and inward investment projects, new and expanded studios and infrastructure, and a wide range of skills and educational opportunities. The funding, the facilities, and the specialist support available have strengthened the development of our crew and talent base, resulted in ever-increasing numbers of top-quality productions choosing to base themselves right here. The recent hit Netflix drama Department Q was supported by Screen Scotland and filmed on set and in the studio in Edinburgh. This is a powerful reminder that when we come together to protect and support our creative industries, we create a virtuous circle that will benefit us for years to come. And that virtuous circle feels more important now than it has ever been. Our world today, and Nicola talked about this in her introduction, feels increasingly fractured, unsure about its present and uncertain about its future. Global conflict, is redrawing the world order. The climate emergency becomes ever more acute every single day. And closer to home, years of economic stagnation and austerity in the UK have left people feeling disillusioned and alienated. Compounding that, the way in which we all see the world is rapidly changing. Increasingly, people are relying less on traditional media and more on the digital world, which, while bringing many opportunities, clearly leaves us much more exposed to disinformation and harmful material. If all of that sounds very gloomy, let me assure you that I am actually very optimistic about Scotland's future. I know that we have all the ingredients it takes to build a thriving, successful country. I see it every day in my work as First Minister, the places that I visit and the people that I meet. But how can we make sense of this increasingly dangerous, angry and uncertain world from this perspective? The answer, as it always has been, comes through the means of creative expression. Culture throws up a mirror and allows us to see Scotland as it truly is, in all its glorious diversity. Culture that helps us to understand ourselves, to understand each other, and to understand the world around about us, to appreciate the things that we have in common, but also to build bridges between us on the issues which we don't. We learn and we grow as people and as a nation when we expose ourselves to new ideas and new thinking. Whether it leaves us dying of laughter or in floods of tears or anything in between, any form of creative expression has the potential to plant a seed in our minds which grows inside us. I'd ask you to reflect on this question: how the International Festival in Edinburgh came into being in the first place. 78 years ago, following the Second World War, Scotland opened her heart to the world with a bold idea: to use culture to heal divisions, to foster understanding and to inspire hope. The festival was born, and with it, a tradition that has made Scotland a beacon for creativity and connection ever since. Nearly 80 years later, Edinburgh festivals continue to evolve, adapting to new generations, new audiences, new technologies, and new global challenges. But their core purpose remains the same: to unite, to inspire, and to open Scotland's doors to the world by sharing the uniquely transformative power of human creativity. That vision of culture as a way to bring people together is as significant today as we can imagine it was in 1947. I'd contend, with the strife in the world today, a reinvigoration of that necessity is critical in these difficult days. So I want to ensure that Scotland's cultural sector continues to bring people together for many generations to come. I know that, just like the government, this sector has faced significant and prolonged financial pressures and challenges. You've been squeezed by rising costs, by new restrictions on the freedom of movement in Europe, by job losses during the pandemic, and too many other challenges to mention. I also know that freedom of expression is under greater and greater attack, both at home and abroad. I want to ensure that Scotland, the birthplace of the Enlightenment, remains a country of robust debate and inquiry. I firmly believe that art and culture must be able to challenge us, to ask us tough questions, and to force us to look at things from different perspectives. And yes, it must at times be allowed to shock and to offend us, but it can also heal us. So let me be absolutely clear as First Minister: I will always protect freedom of speech in our country. It's not the First Minister's job to tell you what to create, nor would I ever seek to do so. But friends, I do have a very important role, and that is in the assistance that my government can provide. As many of you know, 2 years ago we made a commitment to increasing funding for the culture sector by at least £100 million more annually by 28-29. This year's £34 million increase is our biggest increase. It's the biggest increase in the history of devolution. It brings us halfway towards delivering on our commitment, and it includes an additional £4 million for Scotland's festivals. And through Creative Scotland's multi-year funding, more cultural organisations than ever have gained greater certainty and greater security allowing them to plan more ambitiously to support jobs and to make creative work more accessible to diverse audiences across Scotland. At a time when our budget remains under significant pressure and uncertainty, I hope this is seen as a statement of intent from my government that we are making a long-term commitment to supporting you. And this is only the first step in bringing the renewed hope that I think is necessary to the wider culture sector. We're laying the foundations for a more certain future, and I want us to build that better future together. You, the people in this room, the heart of this industry, know better than anyone what is needed here. You know the best methods to achieve the best outcomes. You know how to adapt and to innovate. So I'm asking that from crowdfunding to patronage to philanthropy to local authority support and much more, we all ask ourselves, how can we do more to support the arts from the grassroots up? How can we better support emerging artists that don't necessarily fit the current mould? And how, in particular, can Scotland's emerging businesses in new sectors become the next generation of patrons of the arts and culture in Scotland? How do we incentivise a new guard of custodians of and investors in Scotland's creative economy right across our country? And I want to know your thoughts on how government can help in doing that. And while we engage in those discussions, I want to be absolutely focused on delivery, making the best use of public money to support the sector to find renewed hope and energy and to take confident strides towards even fairer work and even greater inclusivity in culture. There's still so much that Scotland can achieve in this regard, and I want us all to do this because, quite simply, as at the point I've made today, culture is transformative in all of our lives. And there are many examples of innovation in culture, tackling all kinds of societal challenges, from social isolation to youth engagement to environmental sustainability. Festivals, venues and creative businesses are leading the way on sustainable practices and tourism, as well as exploring climate issues through their productions and their programmes. Creative activities bring people together in unique ways. So the Scottish Government is committed to growing Scotland's creative economy for all these reasons and for more. I'm particularly happy that we've launched our Museums Future programme, developed in partnership with Museums Galleries Scotland and the National Heritage Lottery Fund, with £4 million of Scottish Government funding. This programme will support museums and galleries across the country to collaborate and to innovate so that these vital organisations can continue to enrich our local communities now and for generations to come. We'll also continue to back place-based programmes that change lives. Initiatives like the Youth Music Initiative, which is receiving increased funding of almost £10 million this year, opening up creative opportunities for children across Scotland and helping to tackle inequality right at the very heart of my government's programme. Alongside this, we're providing increased funding for Systema Scotland, supporting the kind of long-term sustainable work that I saw in Raploch, work that helps to break cycles of poverty and unlocks potential. And of course, we continue to support our festivals, the jewels in Scotland's cultural life and vital to our economy and in our international reputation. Aberdeen Performing Arts is celebrating 20 years as a cultural cornerstone of the northeast of Scotland through its series of annual festivals, live performances and inspiring creative projects. Glasgow Film Festival celebrated their 20th anniversary this year, continuing to showcase the best of Scottish cinema alongside filmmaking from across the globe, enhancing its earned international reputation for excellence year on year. And here in Edinburgh, Imagineate's incredible Edinburgh International Children's Festival reached their 35th anniversary, bringing wonder and joy to children through theatre. And earlier this year at Celtic Connections, I saw for myself how Scottish traditions continue to thrive and how they welcome and draw together and blend with musical cultures from Africa, the Americas, Europe and beyond, clearly illustrating the undeniable fact that culture connects. The global appeal of Scotland's culture and the benefits it brings to our economy is something that can at times appear taken for granted. Scotland's creative economy enhances our reputation globally and is our unique selling point, every bit as powerful as our landscapes and our food and drink industry. I want to do all that I can to help our interlinked culture and creative industries flourish because it's the right and the smart thing to do. In the face of international barriers, we're developing new ways to support cultural export and exchange. Last year, we published our International Culture Strategy, which sets out how we'll support the international aspirations and potential of Scotland's culture sector. We cannot underestimate the value of international cultural links, and so a key action from the strategy is to better support cultural export and exchange. Where funding is tight, we're working to ensure that public investment gives organisations the certainty to plan and to innovate. And as we strive for a fairer, greener future, I know that our creative industries are ready to lead in that respect through partnership, through new ideas, and through collaboration that reaches across communities, regions and borders together. We will see Scotland's creative economy reach new heights as a consequence of our endeavours. So, I hope to leave you here with the sense that you can be confident that your First Minister and your government place culture at the heart of Scotland's future. We all share an aspiration to build a better nation. We have an opportunity to work together to achieve that aim, and an essential part of that journey is to realise the potential of culture in every community for every person. We all have a stake in this, and we all have a role to play. Without you, the people in this room, Scotland's artists, the organisers, the innovators, the creative industries of Scotland cannot thrive. Through our creative industries, we can attract more jobs and investment. We can share the stories that help us to understand who we are and what we can be. We can produce the murals that enrich our streets, the ceilidhs that bring village halls to life, the music that lifts spirits, and the festivals that share Scotland with the world. These things are not decoration. They are who we are. They are what we inherit and what we create together as a gift to future generations. The richer that gift, the better we all are, because people make culture, and culture makes Scotland. Thank you very much. As I said in my contribution, this is an opportunity for some questions and for some dialogue and for some challenge. And part of the challenge I will leave to the latter part of this dialogue when I invite broadcasters to ask me some questions. So to the non-broadcasters, I would appeal for any questions you want to put to me just now. And we have the opportunity to reflect on some of the themes I've raised and any other issues you want to put to me. So, yes, sir. I think there's a microphone. I'll come to you just there. I think there we are.
Thank you very much, First Minister. I'm Tajesh Mistry. I'm the Chief Executive of Voluntary Health Scotland. We represent members that very much are embedded within delivering arts programmes across the country within communities. And the benefits and the opportunities you've raised are incredibly inspiring and known to us very clearly. The bit I find fascinating is where you achieve those cultural and artistic benefits alongside health and wellbeing benefits. And I wondered whether you see the arts and culture as an opportunity to also find solutions to national issues within health, or whether you see those as two separate issues.
Thanks for the question, and it allows me to share with you one of the central points of my, one of the points I've learned most about in my long years in government is that no issue is invariably sorted out in one neat little compartment. So if we take, let me just be explicit. I don't view arts and culture as over here in one isolated compartment. I see the power of arts and culture percolating through all of our society. So undoubtedly, there will be health outcomes that can be strengthened by the interaction of individuals. And there will be times where people are facing social isolation, and they will be, and that will be affecting their mental and their physical well-being. But brought together in various artistic groups, and one of the great joys of my work in life is that you often turn up at some venue to do one thing, and in the next hall there's something else going on that wasn't part of the programme, and you stumble across it, and it's some dance project for individuals who were all isolated in their homes, and they're all dancing together in a village hall in some part of Scotland. So I hope that gives you the sense that I really think, and there's a challenge for public bodies, because sometimes, and I come up against this issue every so often, public bodies will maybe think, well, why are we funding that programme over there that's not really in our core mission? But it actually might be in your core mission, because if you don't fund that, you might have a queue of people over here with much more distressing challenges. So I think my plea to public bodies across the whole range of different policy areas is be imaginative about where the connections might come from to deliver a better future for individuals. And that's, and arts, music, dance, culture, all of these different attributes of our cultural community could play a part in finding some of those solutions. But thank you for allowing me to illustrate that point. Yes.
Thanks for your remarks, First Minister. I'm Heather Stewart, Chief Executive of On Fife, and also representing Community Leisure UK here today. I think it builds very well on that conversation, because I think what you've demonstrated really well, which we all know, is of course that culture is integral to health and to well-being, education and inclusive economic growth, and all of the things that you've highlighted today. It does, however, remain vulnerable in terms of policy and funding decisions. So definitely hear your plea, I think, to public bodies and the kind of wider sector. But you also asked us, how could government help? And one of the things that I think would definitely be worth considering, given the success of legislation in areas like community empowerment and children's well-being, for example, is whether the government is open to looking at a cultural act for Scotland, some kind of statutory underpinning that would make, the leverage that you're talking about much easier for all of us who are really committed to using culture to demonstrate the wider, the benefits that you're talking about today. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather, and I'm certainly open to that question, because I think the first thing I should say is I recognise that in the context of what everyone's experienced, all public bodies, all individuals have experienced in recent years, financial pressures have been absolutely ferocious, and we have tried within government to allocate public expenditure in a way that supports our wider programme. But I can't stand here and say that's not created its pressures and its challenges for different parts of our society. So we have, but in all of our decisions, we are trying to deliver the financial strength that will enable organisations to make the type of decisions that you're talking about. And obviously, in the budget settlement that we put in place for this year, Angus Robertson argued strongly for the delivery, and amongst all these different financial pressures, for the sector to be strengthened, and we've done that. And of course, I get the sense that cultural organisations around the country are feeling more secure than they were. It's not to say it's perfect, but they are feeling more secure. But we've got to be open to how we might entrench and embed some of those essential connections that I'm talking about. And if legislation in this area would be valuable in that respect, I'm certainly very open to consider that. I think it also can have the effect of really making the point that I answered in the earlier question, which is that there is an importance of utilising the arts and culture to try to deliver better outcomes for individuals as a consequence. And that can obviously help to relieve demand in public sector services. So there's a lot to be drawn together there, but it requires organisations to have a pretty wide outlook in their thinking. Yes. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Lindsay. I work for the Fringe, the noisy sister of the International Festival. So I apologise if your bus journey home is a little longer than normal. I want to talk a little bit about risk appetite. We all know that, award-winning concert pianists are not born overnight. And in order to take risks, artists need the space to fail. And in your considerations about support for culture, are you thinking about ensuring that artists have the space to try, fail and try again, and particularly when those artists can't afford to be taking repeated bites at the apple of the Fringe, for example? Just think, I would love to get a sense of the government's appetite to risk in culture, that has a very healthy appetite to risk in, say, tech and tech innovation. Just be interested to hear some of that.
I think the last part of your question there about the appetite for risk in tech and innovation and business development, the last part of my political life has been spent in dealing with issues in the economy and the public finances, and you have to accept if you invest in business development, it might not all be absolutely perfect. There might be poor outcomes. So if it's good enough for the business environment, it should be good enough for the cultural environment as well. But I think what's important is that we have in place a range of funding and support mechanisms that enable it to be possible for people to make their way into the sector. So I'm struck by the Youth Music Initiative, for example, I think is a really good, well-developed, embedded example of a programme right across the country. Now, it doesn't give everything, but it does give a foundation for individuals to develop their interest in cultural activity. And if I look at some of the ways in which that foundation programme is then enhanced by instrumental music tuition, for example, which in some local authority areas is really sophisticated and substantial, but in other areas is maybe not quite as strong. And those are illustrations of how I think we've essentially got to work in a way that supports individuals on their journey. And their journey might involve some stumbles as they are taking forward their artistic activity. But we've got to be prepared to support people who have that core talent and capability to make their contribution, because they and we will benefit from it. Yes, gentlemen.
Hello, First Minister. My name's Steve Byrne. I'm Chief Executive of TRACS, Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland, based just down the hill at the Storytelling Centre here in Edinburgh. I think we last crossed paths at the Hamish Matters Festival in your constituency through our mutual friend Jim McIntosh, of course, celebrating the work of Hamish Henderson. You talked about a doorstep, a mirror, understanding ourselves. I would just remark that not everything is a creative industry, certainly not in the traditional arts, and it's not on a concert stage. So I'd like to ask a bit about local cultures, thinking of the Bothy Ballad sangsters of the North East, the fiddlers of Orkney and Shetland, musicians, singers of the Gaeltacht, our storytellers, step dancers and craftspeople. This idea of the gift to future generations, that the transmission and safeguarding of these kind of local cultures, unique to this part of the globe, are, as you say, a bridge to understanding cultures from elsewhere. So as Scotland starts to play its part with the UK's implementation of the UNESCO Convention on Intangible Cultural Heritage, how can your government support the infrastructure needed to help to safeguard that local cultural expression, or as the cultural strategy calls it, everyday culture in communities across Scotland?
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thank you for the reminder of the connection with the Hamish Matters Festival. Of course, in my acceptance speech as First Minister, I quoted from Hamish Henderson's epic Freedom Come All Ye as a means of illustrating the focus that was going to be in my First Ministership on eradicating child poverty in our country. And it was a very special connection to the part of the world I have the privilege to serve. So I hope in a sense that that gives you some confidence and reassurance that it's in my heart, the preservation and the nurturing of the indigenous cultures of Scotland, because there are so many diverse cultures of Scotland. I spent a little while at the start of the parliamentary recess in the island of Tiree, where my family holiday, and it reminded me of the deep roots of our Gaelic culture in Scotland and the expression of we were there in the midst of the Tyree Music Festival, so Scottish traditional music in its 21st century format was very much to the fore. So I think all of these different elements of our country have got to be reflected in how we take forward our cultural agenda. I talked about the glorious diversity of Scotland. And I suppose the best way for me to answer your question, and it may be something that we need to take away and talk about in due course, is the extent to which the decisions that are taken in the allocation of public expenditure, the development of legislations, the extent to which you feel confident your aspirations are being reflected in the decisions and the choices that are being made. I certainly hope they are. That's what we intend to do through our policy decisions, our legislative decisions and our funding decisions, because I want to make sure, and I think the huge strength of the Creative Scotland 3-year funding agreements that have been put in place is that I think the reach of that geographically across the country is so much more formidable and so much more significant than it has been, and also so it's more formidable across the country and it's more formidable over time, which should give us the confidence that the aspirations that you've set out are being protected. But if there are weaknesses in our legislation or in policy or in funding, Angus Roberts and I are very open to the discussion of those points. But it's central to the preservation of who we are and what we're about. Now, there's a gentleman over here, I think.
Thank you. Matt Baker, artist from Dumfries and Galloway. I think, yeah, you asked for challenges, and I think follows on from what other folk have said, I think. But it's a challenge of language around the term creative industries. I think, you know, if we persist with this kind of trying to put everything in this basket of creative industries, when we're thinking about funding, we end up with effectively a sort of market failure model, where we're seeing everything as an industry and that can't quite manage on its own, so we need to put in a bit of public funding. But that model really categorically does not work for a lot of the work that you're talking about at grassroots level, that are never, ever going to be financially sustainable because they're done for the common good. So I think, to build on what Heather is saying, I think perhaps we could look at some legislation. We could look at Scotland taking a different view that is presenting culture as part of what we need to build our society, a common good, rather than putting it into an industrial policy basket. And in that way, we can build into things like well-being economy, community wealth building, which I think are really perfect ways for us to be thinking about culture going forward.
Thank you for that, Matt. I think what I've tried to set out today is my belief in the centrality of culture in our society and the benefits that come from culture and artistic activity. And how we develop the support for such activities in different parts of the country is going to vary, but fundamentally it has to make a profound effect on individuals. And finding the right mechanisms to do that, making sure that our public organisations are working together to enhance that and to enable that, making sure that the right climate and culture exists to enable that to thrive is fundamental. I don't take the view that everything's got to have an economic benefit in culture. If I created that impression, that's not the one I'd want to create. I think there are huge economic gains. You know, the city's kind of busy just now, so there's a lot of economic activity going on just now, and other parts of the country likewise. So there is an economic upside, but there's a huge benefit to individuals, to well-being, to sentiment, to how we feel about who we are, that comes from artistic and cultural activity, and we should enable that both practically in our actions, but also in how we talk about it as well. We'll go to this lady here, and then we'll just go here first, and then we'll go to...
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kay Morrison. I'm the Chief Executive of Glasgow Life, and I really welcome today's speech and the support from the government on the culture and creative industries. And you noted within that the Museum's Futures Fund, which is of course also welcomed. Glasgow, as I'm sure you'll be aware, is home to cultural assets of national importance, with the city investing in cultural infrastructure, including Riverside Museum, Borough Collection, Kelvin Grove and others. And you may also be aware of the recent parliamentary motion that congratulated Kelvin Grove Art Museum in Glasgow in being recognised as one of the best museums in the world. More people visit Glasgow's museums than any other city outside of London, and we're obviously, of course, really proud in Glasgow Life of the significant contribution that ourselves in Glasgow make to the wider culture and creative industries sector in Scotland. Recognising Glasgow's significant contribution to Scotland's cultural success, but also your earlier reference to the many great examples across the country, how does the Scottish Government plan to ensure a balanced approach to national funding that supports sustainable investment across all regions? Thank you.
I think there's obviously, you talked through, Kay, there, a huge number of really significant assets in the cultural identity of Scotland, and that Glasgow nurtures so well, and is obviously taking forward to renew a number of those assets at the present time. So I think part of what we try to do through the various funding arrangements that we have in place is to make sure that there is that representative support around the country, reflected in the particular decisions that are taken forward through programmes such as Creative Scotland, through the Festivals programme, which has got to have reach across the whole of the country, and also through the decisions around the local government settlement, which are designed to provide that support to all localities. And by those mechanisms, we want, I hope from what I've said today, that there is a recognition of how much within government we appreciate and value the nature of the assets we have around the whole country, and how that contributes into the wider identity of Scotland. So those are the type of mechanisms and measures that we take forward, but there are obviously always areas where we can have specific discussions about specific projects where there will be challenges for localities to protect some of our major cultural assets, and the government will always be willing to participate in those discussions. Just up to just there.
Is that on? Yes. Thank you, First Minister. I thought your presentation was very heartening. I'm Fiona Doring. I'm Chief Executive at Impact Arts, and we deliver a range of creative engagement projects across central Scotland. I suppose our work is largely targeting people who live with the effects of poverty, and there's a real challenge in Scotland around poverty, as reflected in your government's priority about addressing child poverty. I wondered if you're able to say any more about how we can ensure within Scotland that arts and culture don't bypass those people who are living in the areas of greatest disadvantage, and how we ensure they're really included in all of this rich culture that we talk about here, because I think there is a risk that so often they're not represented across all that we have to offer here. It'd be good to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the. I'm very familiar with the work of Impact Arts, and I would had the pleasure of, well, I think on numerous occasions, stumbling across various Impact Arts projects around the country, which have been fantastic. I suppose my answer comes back to what I said in my answer to the first question, which is about my war on compartmentalisation within government, because if we want to. I am absolutely driven by the need to eradicate child poverty. I think it is an absolute cancer in our society, and it has to be fixed, because it's having a detrimental effect on generation after generation. When I look at some cultural and artistic projects, I can literally trace the people whose lives have been, where poverty has ended, and their life has been transformed by interaction with artistic and cultural activity. So what you warn against, I absolutely, totally accept that it's all very well having this conversation in the centre of Edinburgh in the midst of the International Festival. It is how it's felt in communities. And that's been one of the purposes of what we've tried to do with the work that's been taken forward in the Creative Scotland allocations, but also there is, I think, scope through a whole variety of other approaches where we actually focus on the problem of poverty levels. So if I take, for example, in the Scottish Attainment Challenge, or the use of pupil equity funding, which is heavily weighted towards schools and areas experiencing deprivation, I've seen some great work undertaken through the allocation of those resources at local level to make sure that that artistic experience could be achieved. And there will be numerous examples of how that can be undertaken. I was very struck. I was over in the United States for Tartan Week in April, and there were two local authority pipe bands, Falkirk District and Renfrewshire District pipe bands, of young people who absolutely, along with the Oban High School pipe band, stole the show in the Tartan Day Parade. Part of the thinking behind the organisation of that trip by Falkirk and Renfrewshire was to make sure that no child had an obstacle to going on that trip, which for some of them was the first time they'd been out of the country, and the opportunity that music gave, so they were benefiting from musical tuition in areas, and pipe and drum tuition in areas of deprivation in Scotland, and they were on the Tartan Week Parade in the States. And I think that there's an example there of how opportunity can be opened up and lives transformed by that experience. And I think the more we can think about how different funding streams can be used to make the impact on the central policy objective of eradicating poverty, the better. But your cautionary words are absolutely vital, that we don't lose sight of the importance of that connection. So thank you for that. I've perhaps got, yes, over to back here.
Thanks, First Minister. My name is Amina Shah. I'm the Chief Exec of the National Library of Scotland. Thanks for bringing us here today, and I particularly loved you sharing that magic, that transformation that happened to you as a teenager. And so following on from the previous question, we all know that those moments change lives. And I hear so many writers talking about that, how, their whole life has been transformed, taken out of poverty, for example. Their eyes have been opened by a school library, a local library, an experience, a local museum, a teacher, someone opening up their eyes. But much of that happens in a longitudinal way over many years. How do we think about things outside of electoral cycles, outside of performance measurements? Often we're thinking about the success of a project being in 2 or 3 years' time. But for someone like yourself that noted an experience when you were a teenager, you could perhaps pinpoint that to you being First Minister, for example. Many of us in the room will have a similar sort of tale. How do we measure that, and what could we as a sector give to you and other ministers that would help make that case? I often am in meetings with your colleague Ivan McKee, and he talks a lot about preventative spend and what we could do to remove back office functions and inefficiency to help preventative spend. What I hear and what I believe to be true in my life is that culture is preventative spend. This is the magic that happens, but it doesn't translate into pounds and pence exactly, and it doesn't translate into transformation in a year or even 3.
There's an issue there about funding cycles, which is not unique to the arts and culture. These issues will pertain a whole variety of different sectors, but the point is absolutely crucial in shifting the balance of public expenditure. Because I delivered a speech just before the parliamentary recess, before we set out a whole range of different approaches we're going to take about the public finances, which largely was about the shift that is going to have to take place in our public expenditure from addressing the consequences of issues and to address their causes. So it's about getting into that preventative spend activity. And what I hope I've reassured you about is that very much in my thinking, I see arts and cultural activity as part of that preventative approach of giving people new horizons and new possibilities and ways to overcome obstacles in their lives. And that's got to complement other policy programmes. There will inevitably be, we can't take away the realities of the electoral cycle. I have to say, I feel less inhibited by that in setting out the need for long-term direction. I think part of the leadership role I'm trying to deliver to Scotland is to say, look, we've got long-term challenges and we've got to see them in the long term, and here are the steps that we're taking to address that and map out that agenda, and the public will make their choices. I don't feel that I don't feel it's helpful for us to essentially ignore that reality of long-term change and realignment that's required in society for the pursuit of some short-term 6-month or 12-month gain. And that's an argument I'm quite happy to make to Parliament and will make to Parliament. Others will contribute their views into that debate. But fundamentally, having clear long-term policy objectives, and that's what I've tried to do: eradicate child poverty, grow the economy, get to net zero, improve the public services. These are long-term directions of travel, and they're designed to signal how my government can give leadership to Scotland, and that various steps can be taken in a complementary way to support that agenda. And I think that gives us much more confidence about what lies ahead, rather than thinking about some of the short-termism that is obviously a choice in political debate. I think we've maybe got time for one last question before I take the broadcasters. Yes, gentleman at the back here.
If Scotland's serious about the arts, should it have a minister for the arts?
Who's there?
The Cabinet Secretary, I'm sure you'd like some of the burden to be taken off your shoulders. There used to be a minister. I'm just wondering, if you're serious about it, should there be?
Yeah. It's always like, believe you me, there's a long list of ministerial titles that I often get put to me that people say that we should have within government. And if I answered every one of those requests positively, then we'd have an even larger government than my media critics would suggest was acceptable. But I think what I would assure you about is that, look, I think the best way to look at this is to look at, well, what's happened? What's happened is that Angus Robertson's taken part in the budget process of the Scottish Government round the Cabinet table, and the biggest increase in cultural spend has taken place in 1 year with a £34 million increase. And he had my absolute full support in securing that resource because of all that I've said to you today. So I think that's the way I would tend to look at it. Let's have the folk round the table, let's have the discussion and the debate, and let's see what the outcomes are. And I think a very strong outcome has been delivered for the cultural sector in Scotland. Right, we'll come to the broadcasters. Lindsay Bewes, BBC Scotland.
Thank you, First Minister. A different subject, if that's okay. Your government has consented today to a major wind farm development at Berwick Bank. Environmentalists are saying this is a terrible decision that you've made. It's catastrophic for seabirds. I know your government's talked about mitigation as a condition of that consent, but is prioritising renewables over wildlife not just wrong-headed when it comes to your commitments on saving the environment? And just a supplementary to that, President Trump's views on wind turbines are well known. Were you waiting till he was out of the country before you announced this?
On that question, no. We had to wait for the various considerations to be given to the application on Berwick Bank. And there's obviously a condition being applied onto the Berwick Bank application about mitigation. There are obviously, in any project that we consider and consent, there will be a necessity to weigh up the different benefits and possible consequences. And where we consider those consequences to be real and valid, there will be conditions applied, which has been the case in Berwick Bank, and that will obviously be for the assessment of that approval to be taken forward by the company who've got to fulfil those conditions, and they will of course be monitoring those conditions in terms of what plan they put in place. Gordon Cree.
Thank you. You've talked about the economic and the societal benefits of culture. You've talked about funding as well. It's clearly this month is a huge success story for Scotland, but at the same time, every year we speak to performers of all different types who tell us that to come and perform in these festivals means a hand-to-mouth existence. It is often not viable for them to even put on a show. So how do you ensure that the artists, who after all are who people come to see, feel connected to this success story, which to them often feels is going on around them rather than to them?
I think the key point, Gordon, is about, well, two key points in that respect. One is that I hope now we are getting into a period where there is more confidence and certainty within the artistic community about their financial sustainability. And I've been very candid in what I've said so far. I know that it's been very, very tough. And we were determined to try to create greater certainty and stability. And I hope that we've gone some way towards doing that in the current budget settlement. So that's one thing which I hope is different. I recognise all that you say about how artists feel, but I hope we're now in a climate where that feels a bit more certain. And then the second point is that I think we've acknowledged that there is more we could do to support festivals than has been the case in the past. So the specific festivals fund that has been created is designed to put a bit more public expenditure in just to ease some of that pressure and difficulty, so that, and again, this is where I come back to the point where I think those running festivals are in a better position to make these judgments than the government is, where we put the money in there and those festivals can judge what are the things that would make a difference on some of the important questions that you raise. So we're trying at an individual and at a collective level to take steps to strengthen the position, and I hope out of all of that we have, well, I'm sure we will have a festival's experience which will be as buoyant and as imaginative as it always has been. Okay. Right. Can I express my warmest thanks to the International Festival, to Nicola for hosting. Thank you, Michael. Thank you to all of you for coming today, and I look forward to carrying on the conversation along with Angus Robertson, and to making sure that you understand and that we demonstrate that the arts and culture are absolutely essential to the well-being of Scotland and to the future of our country. Thank you very much.